It begins in a way that doesn't immediately signal how big the story is about to become. There's no dramatic reveal, no explosive headline at first, just a carefully delivered public statement from Melania Trump. Calm in tone, controlled in delivery, and very precise in wording. On the surface, it feels like an attempt to settle something once and for all. She addresses her connection to Jeffrey Epstein, or more specifically, her lack of one. She explains that she was never friends with him, that while their names may appear in the same social environments, that overlap doesn't mean anything meaningful. According to her, it was simply a matter of being present in the same elite circles, places like New York City and Palm Beach, where influential figures often attend the same events, dinners, and gatherings without forming real relationships. She goes further than a simple denial. She explains past interactions in detail, mentions an email exchange, describes it as polite, casual, nothing more than a brief moment of social courtesy. She emphasizes that it cannot be interpreted as a sign of a deeper connection, that it was insignificant, routine, forgettable. And for a moment it sounds convincing, because the statement is structured in a way that anticipates doubt. It doesn't just deny, it explains. It closes gaps before they can even be questioned. It feels intentional, like every word was chosen to remove ambiguity. But that's where something shifts, because instead of ending the conversation, it restarts it. People begin reacting almost immediately, not necessarily because of what she said, but because of how and when she said it. The timing stands out. The Epstein story, while never fully gone, had settled into the background. It wasn't dominating daily discussion in the same way it once did. So why now? That question becomes the center of attention. Why revisit something that had already cooled down? Why bring it back into focus instead of letting it remain where it was? Present, but quiet. And then there's the level of detail. Because when someone gives a very detailed denial, it can sometimes have an unexpected effect. Instead of closing the door, it makes people look closer at what's behind it. It invites scrutiny, even if that wasn't the intention. Some listeners begin to feel like the statement goes beyond what was necessary, that it doesn't just respond, it preemptively defends. And that creates a subtle tension, because when a message feels like it's answering questions that haven't fully been asked yet, it can give the impression that something else is coming. And that's the moment where the tone of the story begins to change. What started as a controlled statement now feels like the beginning of something larger, something unresolved, something that hasn't fully surfaced yet. And without realizing it, the audience shifts from listening to watching more closely. Because now, it's not just about what was said, it's about what might come next. As the public begins reacting to the statement, attention slowly moves away from the words themselves and towards something less visible, but just as important: what's happening behind the scenes. Because almost immediately, reports begin to surface that don't fully align with each other. Some sources suggest that Donald Trump was not informed ahead of time, that he didn't know the statement was going to be made, that he wasn't aware of what would be said before it became public. But then, almost as quickly, other voices push back against that version. They claim the opposite, that he did know, that he was informed, that nothing about the situation was unexpected or unplanned. And just like that, the clarity of the situation begins to fade, because both versions can't exist at the same time. One suggests independence, the other suggests coordination, and without confirmation, the uncertainty becomes part of the story itself. This contradiction creates a new layer of interest, because now the focus isn't just on the statement, it's on the relationship between the people involved in it. Was this a unified message, or was it something separate? That distinction matters more than it seems, because when public figures operate in alignment, their messaging tends to reinforce itself. But when there's even a hint of misalignment, people start looking for meaning in that gap. Observers begin analyzing the tone again, this time with a different perspective. They notice that Melania's words are centered entirely on her own position. She distances herself clearly and directly. But she doesn't extend that same clarity outward. She doesn't frame her statement as a shared defense. It remains focused, contained, individual. And that subtle detail doesn't go unnoticed. Because in situations like this, what's left unsaid often carries as much weight as what is spoken. As these observations spread, the narrative begins to evolve. It's no longer just about a denial. It starts to feel like positioning, like preparation, like something is being set in place, even if the full picture isn't visible yet. And just as people begin trying to interpret what all of this might mean, the story takes an unexpected turn because a new voice enters the conversation, and that changes everything. The shift doesn't come from an official source. It doesn't come from a press conference or a major news outlet. It comes from social media. A name begins appearing more and more frequently: Amanda Unaro. At first, there's no clear reason to focus on it, just another voice among many. But that changes almost instantly when people see what she says. "I know everything." It's a simple statement, just a few words. But the impact is immediate. Because those words suggest more than opinion. They suggest knowledge, access, proximity to something that hasn't been fully revealed. And that's what captures attention. Amanda doesn't present herself as someone speculating from the outside. She presents herself as someone who was there. Someone who experienced the environment she's describing. She begins sharing pieces of her past, not all at once, but gradually. Enough to create a picture, but not enough to fully define it. She talks about being 17 years old, boarding a private jet associated with Jeffrey Epstein, a flight that included other young models, a situation that felt uncomfortable, even at the time. She describes a sense of unease. Not necessarily fear in a clear, defined way, but a feeling that something wasn't right. Something she couldn't fully understand at that age, but something that stayed with her. And that detail matters, because it doesn't feel exaggerated, it doesn't feel overly constructed, it feels incomplete. And that incompleteness makes it more compelling. She doesn't make direct accusations in the way others have in the past. Instead, she frames her experience differently. She describes herself as part of a system built around access, influence, and opportunity. And once that idea is introduced, it changes how everything else is viewed. Because now, the story isn't just about individuals. It's about a structure, a network, something larger than any single person. And that perspective begins to shift the conversation in a new direction. As Amanda's presence grows, so does the attention around her words. People begin watching more closely, looking for patterns, trying to understand not just what she's saying, but what she might be implying. And gradually her statements begin to take on a different tone. They become more specific, more focused. She starts hinting at connections beyond Epstein himself, connections to the people around him, to the broader social circles that existed during that time. And that's when the story begins to accelerate, because now the conversation isn't just about the past, it's about relationships, proximity, overlap. She suggests that she and Melania moved within similar environments, that they attended events where their paths may have crossed, that they were part of the same world, even if not directly connected in the way people might assume. And then she introduces something that changes the entire dynamic, the idea that there's more she hasn't said yet, that what's been shared so far is only part of the picture, that there are details, connections, or experiences that haven't been revealed, but could be. That suggestion alone creates a new level of tension, because now the focus isn't just on what exists, it's on what might exist. People begin following closely, not for confirmation, but for anticipation, waiting for the next piece, the next hint, the next statement that might bring everything into clearer focus. And that waiting becomes part of the story itself. Despite everything that's been said, one reality remains unchanged. There is no verified evidence confirming these claims, no documents that clearly connect the dots, no official confirmation that transforms suggestion into fact. And under normal circumstances, that would slow things down. But here, it doesn't. Because attention isn't always driven by certainty. Sometimes it's driven by possibility. The idea that something could be true can be just as powerful as proof itself, especially when the topic already carries history, complexity, and public interest. Discussions begin spreading across platforms. Some people analyze every detail, trying to build connections from what's available. Others push back, emphasizing the lack of confirmation and urging caution. But what's notable is that almost no one ignores it. Because even in the absence of proof, the story has momentum. It exists in a space where nothing is fully established, but nothing is fully dismissed either. And that space keeps people engaged, watching, waiting. As the present becomes more uncertain, attention shifts toward the past. People begin looking back. Old images resurface, past interviews are revisited, statements that once seemed unimportant are now examined more closely. Connections that were once distant begin to feel closer, not because new information has emerged, but because the context has changed. Names that have been associated with Epstein before begin appearing again in discussions, not as new revelations, but as reminders of what already existed. And when those reminders surface, they bring questions with them. Questions that may not have clear answers, but still demand attention. Because once a narrative is reopened, it rarely returns to its original state. It evolves. At this stage, it becomes clear that this isn't a story that will simply fade away, because it never fully ended to begin with. It remained in the background, unresolved, waiting for something to bring it forward again. And now, with new voices, new claims, and new attention, it's active again. Every statement adds another layer. Every reaction reshapes the narrative. And with the suggestion that more information could still come out, the story feels incomplete, like something is still missing. And that sense of incompleteness is what keeps people watching. Because as long as there are unanswered questions, there will always be attention. And as long as there is attention, the story continues.